The year was 663. The seas between Japan and Korea were restless, and the winds carried more than the smell of salt. They carried the echoes of war. To understand this moment, we must step back a little, to a time when the Korean peninsula was not a single land, but a patchwork of rival kingdoms. Goguryeo in the north, Silla in the southeast, and Baekje in the southwest. Each kingdom fought for power, each claimed dominion, and each in their own way shaped the history that followed. Japan, still in its formative centuries, had ties with these lands across the sea. Among them, Baekje was the closest. They shared not only trade, but also culture, religion, and bloodlines. Buddhist monks, craftsmen, and scholars had sailed from Baekje to Japan, carrying books, statues, and the refined knowledge of the continent. For the Japanese court, Baekje was not simply a neighbour, it was a trusted friend, almost family. But history rarely spares alliances. By the mid-7th century, Baekje had fallen into decline. The kingdom of Silla, seeking dominance, made a bold alliance with the mighty Tang dynasty of China. With Tang armies at their side, Silla struck hard, and in the year 660, Baekje collapsed. Its fortresses fell, its capital was seized, and its king was taken prisoner. For Japan, this was more than troubling news. It was a wound to the heart. Their ally was gone, swallowed by the tide of Silla-Tang power, and the balance of the region shifted overnight. Yet Baekje was not entirely gone. Remnants of its people, nobles and warriors, refused to surrender. They sought refuge, they planned rebellions, and they sent urgent calls across the sea to Japan, begging for aid.
In the Japanese court, voices rose with urgency. The Soga clan, powerful patrons of continental influence, pressed for action. To them, abandoning Baekje meant not only losing an ally, but also letting Silla and Tang tighten their grip over East Asia. And so, Japan decided to act. Ships were built, supplies gathered, and warriors assembled. The goal was clear: restore Baekje, push back Silla, and keep alive the bridge of culture and power that bound the two nations. In 663, the Japanese fleet set sail across the waters. Imagine the sight: hundreds of ships of varying sizes, laden with soldiers, armor gleaming, banners snapping in the wind. The seas churned with oars, and the cries of warriors rose above the waves. They landed on Korean soil, uniting with Baekje loyalists who had gathered for one last stand. But Silla and Tang were ready. Their forces, disciplined and vast, closed in swiftly, and it was upon the waters of the Baekgang River that destiny struck. The battle was fierce, and the river itself seemed to boil with fire and blood. The Japanese and Baekje alliance fought bravely, but the Tang navy was formidable. Their ships were larger, better built for war. Arrows darkened the skies, and the river was set aflame with burning oil. One after another, Japanese vessels were consumed by fire or shattered by enemy rams. Warriors plunged into the water, their armor dragging them down as cries echoed against the riverbanks. The Baekje resistance, though courageous, could not withstand the might of the Tang-Silla coalition. By the end of the battle, it was clear: Japan had been utterly defeated. The consequences were immense. Thousands of Japanese soldiers perished, and Baekje's final hope was extinguished. The kingdom was no more, absorbed fully into Silla's growing power. For Japan, the defeat was devastating, not only in lives lost but in pride and position. It was a harsh lesson. The world beyond their shores was vast and powerful, and Japan was not yet ready to challenge giants like Tang. But from this defeat also came transformation. In the years that followed, Japan turned inward with a new determination. They saw the need to strengthen their state, to centralize power, to fortify defenses, and to learn from the systems of China. It was after this catastrophe that the Japanese court began adopting new reforms, known as the Taika reforms, reshaping their government to mirror the great dynasties of the continent.
A bitter loss had planted seeds for future strength. As for Silla, the victory at Bakgang solidified its dominance over the peninsula. With Tang's backing, it pressed further until it unified most of Korea under its rule. This unification would leave a lasting mark on East Asian history, creating a Korea that was stronger, more centralized, and deeply influential in its culture. Yet the memory of Baekje did not vanish. In Japan, the descendants of Baekje nobles and scholars continued to live and serve, weaving their legacy into the fabric of Japanese society. Their skills in writing, architecture, and art enriched the islands for centuries.
So when we look back at 663, we do not only see the fall of Baekje, we see a turning point. It was the moment when Japan learned the hard truth of international power, when an old ally vanished, and when a new era of reform began. The river at Baekgang ran red that day, but from its waters rose lessons that shaped the destiny of nations. Even now, if you travel along the riverbanks in Korea, there are whispers of that ancient clash, a memory embedded in the land. It is a reminder that history is not just about victories, it is also about the defeats that teach, that humble, and that force a people to grow. The story of Japan in the 8th century is, in many ways, the story of a nation still trying to define itself. After centuries of borrowing ideas from the Asian mainland, government structures, writing systems, architecture, religion, Japan was now standing at a crossroads. The rulers of the Yamato state had grown powerful, but they needed more than armies and rice harvests to secure their legacy. They needed something lasting, something that would declare to their people and to the world that Japan was a united and sophisticated nation. That something was a capital. Not just a place to govern from, but a grand city, a symbol of stability, wealth, and civilization. The year is 736 AD, and the debate over where this capital should be and what it should represent was in full swing. At the heart of the matter was a simple but powerful question. Should Japan have a permanent capital, or should it continue the old tradition of moving the royal court every time an emperor died? In earlier centuries, death was believed to bring spiritual pollution, so it was customary for the court to pack up and relocate, often to nearby regions. This nomadic system had worked when the royal household was smaller, but by the 8th century, it was becoming impractical. The government was bigger, Buddhist temples were growing in importance, and scribes, artisans, and officials all needed more permanence. Imagine the chaos of moving not only the emperor's family, but also priests, scholars, tax records, treasures, and sacred relics every few decades. It was exhausting, inefficient, and unsustainable. So the rulers began to look toward building something more enduring. They looked at China, particularly the Tang dynasty's magnificent capital of Chang'an, with its wide avenues, walled compounds, and carefully planned districts. For Japanese envoys and monks who had traveled to China, Chang'an must have seemed like a wonder of the world. Bustling marketplaces filled with silk and spices, towering gates, sprawling palaces, and an air of order and permanence. Japan wanted that. It wanted a capital that could stand shoulder to shoulder with the great cities of Asia, one that could showcase its ambitions and its growing cultural sophistication. The first experiment had already begun earlier in the century with the construction of Fujiwara-kyo, but the site was limited and political troubles undermined its success. By the early 700s, attention shifted to Nara in the Yamato Basin, a fertile region already rich with shrines, temples, and political connections. In 710, the court officially established Heijo-kyo, known today as Nara, as the capital. It was modeled after Chang'an, with a grid-like street plan, broad central avenues, and a palace complex at the northern end, facing south in accordance with Chinese geomantic principles. But even with Nara in place, the struggle was far from over. By 736, the court was still wrestling with the consequences of this decision. Nara was impressive, but it was also fraught with challenges. For one thing, Buddhist temples had quickly become powerful players in the city's politics. The temples of Todaiji, Kofukuji, and others were not only spiritual centers, but also economic and political institutions. Land, wealth, and influence flowed into their hands,
and with it, the ability to pressure the court. Some officials worried that the capital was becoming too dependent on religious power, threatening the balance of the state. Others believed this was a blessing, that the favour of the Buddha could only strengthen the empire. The truth was somewhere in between, and it made every decision about the city a matter of both politics and faith. Another issue was geography. Nara lay in a basin surrounded by mountains, beautiful but also somewhat confined. The city had room to grow, but officials began to question whether it was the ideal site for a capital meant to last forever. Some pushed for moving to other locations, such as Kuni or Shigaraki, which were briefly tried in later years. Each new proposal reflected deeper anxieties about what kind of Japan was being built and who would control it. Amid this, 736 brought with it another crisis: disease. An epidemic, likely smallpox, swept through Japan, devastating the population, including members of the imperial family and aristocracy. In a time when disease was often seen as a sign of cosmic imbalance or divine displeasure, the plague cast a shadow over the court's ambitions. Was Nara cursed? Was the land itself unsuitable for a capital? Superstition mixed with politics, and once again the question of moving the capital re-emerged. But the alternative sites never gained the same momentum. Nara, despite its problems, remained the centre of power. When we think of Nara today, we think of its great Buddhist temples and its deer roaming the temple grounds. But in the 8th century, it was a political experiment. A bold attempt to transplant the grandeur of Chinese civilization into Japanese soil. Wide boulevards were laid down. The imperial palace rose with tall gates and painted halls. The markets filled with imported goods, from Chinese ceramics to Korean metalwork. Scribes copied texts in Chinese characters, while poets and musicians found new inspiration in foreign traditions. For the first time, Japan truly felt like a part of the East Asian cultural sphere. Yet beneath the surface there was tension. Some aristocrats worried that the capital's ties to Buddhism were overshadowing Shinto traditions, which had long been the foundation of imperial legitimacy. Others feared that building cities too large would drain the countryside of labour and resources. And still others saw opportunity. The growth of bureaucracy meant new positions, new honours, and new pathways to power. The choice of a capital was never just about geography. It was about the soul of Japan, about balancing old traditions with new influences, about deciding whether Japan would continue to follow in China's footsteps or carve out its own path. By the mid-8th century, Nara had become a true centre of Japanese culture, with its mixture of politics, religion, and art. The city symbolised permanence, but it also carried the burden of uncertainty. The debates over its suitability foreshadowed later struggles. Just a few decades after, in 794, the capital would move again, this time to Heian-kyo, known today as Kyoto, which would endure as Japan's imperial heart for over 1,000 years. But in 736, that was still far in the future. For the people living in that moment, the capital was more than just buildings and streets. It was a dream of a united nation, a statement to the world, and a fragile experiment tested by disease, religion, and politics. So, when we think of this period, we should imagine the sound of hammers striking wood as new halls were raised. The shuffle of officials walking down broad avenues, carrying scrolls. The chanting of monks echoing from newly built temples. And the constant hum of a city still learning what it meant to be the centre of an empire. It was messy, uncertain, and sometimes tragic, but it was also the beginning of something extraordinary. Choosing a capital was never a simple choice of where to live. It was the question of what kind of civilization Japan wanted to be. And in the year 736, Japan was answering that question in the only way it knew how. Through ambition, faith, and a determination to carve its own place in the world.